So continuing on with our examples, we're still focusing on EX2, and now we're going to go ahead and talk about how some other methods in RxJava can be used. And again, keep in mind that this is all in the context of checking to see whether a stream of large, random, big integers are prime or not. So in this particular case, we're going to focus on the test_is_prime_async method, and this uses an asynchronous observable stream that will process random big integer objects to determine which ones are prime. This is not time-driven. This is just going to be running asynchronously. And this will give us a chance to talk about some other methods that are part of RxJava. In addition to the other ones we've already looked at, we'll take a look at ObservOn, and we'll also take a look at ignore elements. So I'll talk about both of those methods. And then we're also going to talk about range and scheduler's new thread, and also subscribe_on. So this will introduce you to a whole bunch of other things. Let's start by talking about the range method. The range method will be used to build an observable that only emits a sequence of incrementing integers. And those integers will start at start, and they will go up to count number of those things. So let's say you say start is 1 and count is 10. It'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It'll be 10 numbers starting at start. And so start is included in the range up to and including the count. So it'll, however many things count, will also be included as well. Project Reactor has the range method on a flux that works pretty much the same. And there's also something called range closed in Java streams that works on an int stream or a long stream that also work in very much the same way. The subscribe_on method is something that we've seen before in the context of singles, but now of course, we're going to be talking about it in the context of observables. And this is going to be used to run the subscribe, onSubscribe, and request methods on the specified scheduler parameter. And this scheduler parameter indicates what thread the operation will be performed on. So it gives you a chance to control the threading. What gets returned from subscribe_on is an observable that will be requesting asynchronous processing. So when you use subscribe_on, you're basically saying, hey, please run me asynchronously. Thank you very much. Now, the semantics of subscribe_on are a little bit odd, and they're very much the same as the odd semantics that we had for single subscribe_on for the same reasons. The way it works is if you put subscribe_on in a chain, then that will impact the execution context of the on_next, on_error, and on_complete signals, starting from the beginning of the chain up to the next occurrence of observe any. And we'll talk about observe any in a minute. There may not be any observe any calls, as there are not in this case, in which case, ignore that. But if there is an observe on call, then in that case, it's going to have an impact on where things run. And we'll see some examples of that when we go further along. Project Reactor has a subscribe_on method that works essentially the same. And now that we've talked briefly about subscribe_on, let's talk about ObservOn. And this is used to run the on_next, on_complete, and on_error methods on the supplied scheduler worker parameter as well. Just as with subscribe_on, you can indicate where you want the processing to take place, what thread or what thread from what pool of threads. Again, you get back an observable that will be requesting the async processing. So this is saying, I want to be processed in this specific context from now on. The semantics of ObservOn, in my mind, are a little more obvious and a little more intuitive than subscribe_on. Subscribe_on is kind of confusing because it starts at the beginning of the chain and just keeps going down until you hit either the end of the chain or you hit ObservOn. So what ObservOn does, I think, is more straightforward. What it says is, from the point where I was called up to the next ObservOn in the chain, if any, and there could be none, run all those other operations in that threading context. And you'll see things get really fun when we combine subscribe_on and ObservOn in the same chain. And I'll actually show you an example to demonstrate how that works shortly. Project Reactor has a similar capability, but for some mysterious reason, they call it publish_on, not ObservOn, which I find somewhat confusing. Okay, so now let's go ahead and turn our attention to the test_is_prime_async method, and that's also part of the EX2 example. So we're going to walk through that code next.